The dust kicked up around the wheels of the stagecoach as it rolled into Kingman, Arizona territory, on a sweltering afternoon in August of 1882. And Katherine Vaughn stood on the wooden platform watching it arrive with a mixture of dread and desperate hope twisting in his gut. He had placed that advertisement 6 months ago in a moment of loneliness that seemed foolish now, standing here with his worn hat in his hands and his heart hammering against his ribs. The advertisement had been simple, perhaps too simple. Rancher in Arizona territory seeks wife, hardworking, honest, willing to build a life in harsh but beautiful country. He had received only one response, a letter written in broken English by what he assumed was a translator, from a woman named Alina Zielinski, who said she was 20 years old and coming from Poland. The stagecoach door opened, and the driver helped down an elderly woman first, then a merchant Katherine recognized from town, and finally a young woman who looked around with wide, frightened eyes that reminded him of a doe he had once seen caught in a canyon with no way out. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, he guessed, with dark blonde hair pinned up under a simple bonnet and a worn traveling dress that had seen better days. She clutched a single carpet bag to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. Katherine stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden platform. The woman's eyes found his, and he saw her shoulders tense even more. He tried to smile, hoping it looked reassuring rather than menacing. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders from years of ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and hands that were more callous than not. His dark hair needed a trim, and his face probably could have used a shave, but he had done his best this morning, putting on his cleanest shirt and even attempting to tame his hair with water. "Miss Zielinski?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. She nodded quickly, her knuckles white around the handle of her bag. Then she spoke, a rapid string of words in a language that sounded nothing like English, her tone clearly questioning. Katherine felt his stomach sink. The letter had been in English, even if broken. He had assumed she spoke at least some English. He held up his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture and pointed to himself. "Katherine Vaughn." She stared at him for a moment, then seemed to understand. She pointed to herself. "Alina," she said, pronouncing it Alina, with the emphasis on the second syllable. He nodded and smiled again, then reached for her bag. She flinched back and he froze, realizing how that must have looked. He mimed carrying a bag and pointed toward the wagon he had parked on the street. She looked at the wagon, then back at him, then slowly, hesitantly, handed him the bag. The ride to his ranch took nearly 2 hours, and they were the most uncomfortable 2 hours of Katherine's life. Alina sat as far from him on the wagon seat as she could manage without falling off, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the landscape rolling past. He tried a few times to make conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch, but her blank, frightened expression made it clear she did not understand a word. Eventually, he fell silent, focusing on driving and wondering what in God's name he had gotten himself into. The ranch house was modest, a sturdy wooden structure he had built himself 5 years ago when he had first claimed this land. It had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small spare room he used for storage. There was a barn, a corral, and about 200 acres of grazing land for his small herd of cattle. It was not much, but it was his, earned through sweat and determination. He helped Alina down from the wagon, careful not to touch her more than necessary, and carried her bag into the house. She followed slowly, looking around with those same wide eyes. The inside was clean at least. He had spent the last week scrubbing and organizing, wanting to make a good impression. There was a table he had built, 4 chairs, a stove he had saved up for 2 years to buy, shelves with supplies, and a rocking chair by the fireplace that had belonged to his mother. Katherine set her bag down and gestured around the room. "Home," he said, then felt stupid because of course she did not know what that meant. Alina walked slowly around the main room, her fingers trailing over the table, the back of a chair. She said something in Polish, her voice soft, and he wished desperately that he knew what she was saying. He pointed to the bedroom door. "You can have the bedroom, I will sleep out here." She did not understand, so he picked up her bag, opened the bedroom door, and set the bag on the bed. Then he pointed to her, then to the bed, trying to make it clear. She looked at the bed, then at him, confusion clear on her face. He backed out of the room, closing the door partially, and pointed to the rocking chair, then to himself, trying to mime sleeping. Understanding seemed to dawn, and she nodded, but she looked even more confused. She spoke again in Polish, a question by her tone, and gestured between them. Katherine had no idea what she was asking. He spread his hands helplessly. "I do not understand." Alina's shoulders slumped and she sank down onto one of the chairs at the table, looking utterly exhausted and lost. Katherine felt a surge of sympathy mixed with frustration. This was going to be much harder than he had imagined. That first night was awkward and stilted. Katherine made dinner, a simple stew from the supplies he had, and Alina ate in silence, barely meeting his eyes. After they finished, she helped him clean up, seeming to understand that much at least through gesture. When darkness fell completely, she retreated to the bedroom and closed the door firmly. Katherine heard something scrape across the floor and realized she had pushed something against the door. His chest tightened. She was barricading herself in, afraid of him. He settled into the rocking chair with a blanket, staring at the dying fire in the fireplace, and wondered how they were possibly going to make this work. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn as usual and went out to tend to the animals. When he came back in, Alina was up, still wearing her traveling dress, looking uncertain. He smiled at her and she gave him a tiny, hesitant smile back. Progress, he thought. He made breakfast, eggs and bread, and they ate together in silence again. Afterward, he had to go check on his cattle in the far pasture, a job that would take most of the day. He tried to explain this to Alina through gestures, pointing to the sun and moving his hand across the sky to show time passing, then pointing outside. She seemed to understand that he was leaving, and he saw fear flash across her face. On impulse, he went to the shelf and pulled down a book, one of the few he owned. It was a primer his mother had used to teach him to read, with simple words and pictures. He brought it to Alina and opened it, pointing to a picture of an apple and the word beneath it. "Apple," he said clearly. She looked at the book, then at him, and he saw understanding in her eyes. He pointed to the word again. "Apple, English." "Apple," she repeated carefully, her accent thick but the word recognizable. He grinned and nodded enthusiastically. He flipped to another page, a picture of a house. "House." "House," she said, concentrating hard. He left the book with her and headed out for the day, feeling slightly better. At least it was a start. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Katherine would work during the day, and in the evenings, they would sit at the table and he would try to teach her English using the primer and pointing to objects around the house. She was a quick learner, picking up basic words rapidly. Table, chair, bread, water, fire. But conversations were still impossible, and Katherine found himself increasingly frustrated by how little he could communicate with her. He wanted to know where in Poland she came from, what her life had been like, why she had agreed to travel across an ocean to marry a stranger. He wanted to tell her that she did not have to be afraid of him, that he would never hurt her, that he understood she needed time. But all he could do was point to objects and repeat their names like a fool. Alina seemed equally frustrated. He would catch her sometimes staring at something with a frown, clearly wanting to say something but unable to find the words. She helped around the house, cooking and cleaning, but she moved like a ghost, quiet and careful, always keeping distance between them. One evening, about 10 days after her arrival, Katherine was sitting at the table after dinner, trying to figure out how to explain the concept of tomorrow, when Alina suddenly stood up and went to her carpet bag, which she kept in the bedroom. She returned with a small, worn book and handed it to him. He opened it carefully and realized it was a Polish-English dictionary, old and well used, with handwritten notes in the margins. He looked up at her in surprise, and she pointed to herself, then to the book, and made a gesture like turning pages and studying. "You have been studying too," he said, even though she could not fully understand. She pointed to the dictionary, then to herself, and said slowly, carefully, "I learn." "English?" His heart swelled. "Yes, and I will learn Polish." She looked confused, so he pointed to himself, then to her, and said, "Teach me Polish." Her eyes widened in surprise. She pointed to herself questioningly. He nodded firmly. "Teach me Polish." A smile broke across her face, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her entirely. She was beautiful when she smiled, he realized with a start, truly beautiful. That night their lessons changed. Alina would point to something and say the word in Polish, and Katherine would repeat it, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Then he would say the English word, and she would repeat that. It was slow and clumsy, but it was communication, real communication, and Katherine felt something shift between them. As the weeks passed and summer turned toward fall, they built a shared vocabulary that was a mixture of both languages. Katherine learned that the Polish word for water was woda, and that bread was chleb. Alina learned more English every day, her vocabulary growing steadily. They began to be able to exchange simple sentences, a broken mixture of both languages, but enough to start understanding each other. One evening in late September, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and Alina suddenly said in halting English, "Why you want wife? You good man. Work hard." Katherine was surprised by the question. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Lonely," he finally said simply. "Ranch is empty, just me." She nodded slowly, seeming to understand. Then she said, "Poland, very hard, father dead, mother dead, brother too, sickness." She struggled for the word. "Cholera." "I am sorry," Katherine said, his chest tight with sympathy. He reached out without thinking and touched her hand where it rested on the porch railing. She did not pull away. "I had nothing," she continued, her eyes on the sunset. "No family, no money, no future." She turned to look at him. "Letter said you good man. Honest, I think. Maybe chance." "New life." "It is a new life," Katherine said. "For both of us." She smiled at him, that same smile that transformed her face. "You kind man, Katherine. I afraid at first, but now, not afraid." Something warm spread through his chest. Over the past weeks, he had found himself watching her when she did not notice, admiring the determined set of her jaw when she struggled with a new English word, the way her eyes lit up when she finally understood something, the grace with which she moved around the house, and the gentle way she treated the animals. He had married her in name only so far, a hasty ceremony performed by the justice of the peace the day after she arrived, both of them barely understanding what was happening. But somewhere along the way, his feelings had started to shift from duty and loneliness into something deeper. As October arrived and the weather began to cool, their conversations grew longer and more complex. Alina told him, in a mixture of Polish and broken English, about her childhood in a small village outside of Krakow, about helping her mother in the garden and learning to cook and sew. She told him about the terrible winter when the sickness came, and took her family one by one, leaving her alone at 18 with nothing. A distant cousin had helped her get to Warsaw, where she had worked as a seamstress for a year, barely surviving, until she saw Catherine's advertisement translated in a newspaper. Katherine told her about his own past, about growing up in Texas as the youngest of 4 brothers, about heading west after his parents died to claim his own land and make his own way. He told her about the hard early years, living in a tent while he built the house, slowly building up his herd, the loneliness of going days without seeing another person. They worked together more naturally now. Alina had taken over most of the cooking, and Katherine had to admit her meals were much better than his rough attempts. She made dishes from her homeland when she could adapt the recipes to the ingredients available, and soups and stews that warmed him from the inside out. She kept the house cleaner than it had ever been, and mended his clothes with tiny, perfect stitches. Katherine taught her to ride so she could come with him when he checked on the cattle. She was nervous at first, but determined, and within a week she could handle his gentlest mare with confidence. They would ride out together in the mornings, and he would show her the land, the boundaries of the ranch, the best water sources, the places where the cattle liked to gather. She seemed to love the wide open spaces, so different from her village in Poland. One day in late October, they were riding back from checking the northern fence line when they saw smoke rising from the direction of his neighbor's property. Katherine urged his horse into a gallop, and Alina followed. When they arrived, they found Thomas Werner's barn on fire, and Thomas and his 2 sons desperately trying to get their horses out. Katherine and Alina both dismounted and ran to help. The fire was spreading fast, and the horses were panicking. Katherine ran into the barn despite the smoke and heat, throwing his coat over the head of the nearest horse to calm it, and let it out. Alina was doing the same with another horse, her face determined despite her fear. They made trip after trip until all the animals were safe, and then they helped form a bucket line from the well to try to contain the fire. By the time it was over, the barn was a total loss, but the house was saved and all the animals were alive. Thomas, a German immigrant in his 50s, clasped Katherine's hand gratefully. "Thank you, my friend. Without your help, we would have lost everything." His wife, Margaret, hugged Alina tightly, saying something in German. Alina responded in Polish, and somehow the 2 women seemed to understand each other, both of them speaking their own languages but getting the meaning across through tone and gesture. As they rode home in the dusk, Katherine looked over at Alina. Her face was smudged with soot and her dress was ruined, but her eyes were bright. "You were brave today," he said. She smiled at him. "We help is right thing." "Yes," he agreed. Then, after a pause, "You are a good woman, Alina." She looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You good man, Katherine. More good every day I know you." That night, after they had both washed up and eaten a late dinner, Katherine found himself unable to stop thinking about her. The way she had run into that burning barn without hesitation to help save the animals. The way she had comforted Margaret Werner even though they did not speak the same language. The way she looked at him sometimes now, with warmth instead of fear. He realized, sitting in his rocking chair and watching her darn a sock by lamplight, that he was falling in love with his wife. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. November brought colder weather and the first hints of winter. Katherine taught Alina how to shoot, in case she ever needed to defend herself or the ranch. She was a surprisingly good shot once she got over her nervousness about the loud noise. He also started teaching her about the cattle, how to spot when one was sick, how to check their hooves, the basics of ranch management. Alina continued to improve her English, and Catherine's Polish was getting better too, though he still struggled with the complex grammar. They could have real conversations now, even if they still sometimes had to stop and think about how to say something, or resort to gestures. One evening in mid-November, Alina was making dinner while Catherine sat at the table oiling some leather tack. The comfortable silence between them was interrupted by Alina suddenly saying, "Catherine, I want to ask something." He looked up. "What is it?" She kept her eyes on the pot she was stirring. "We married, but not married. You understand," his hands stilled on the leather. He understood exactly what she meant. They had been living as companions, friends even, but not as husband and wife in the full sense. "Yes, I understand." "I want to know." "Why?" She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You do not want me as wife?" "No." Catherine stood up quickly, the tack falling forgotten to the floor. "No, Alina, that is not it at all." "Then what?" she asked, and he could hear the hurt in her voice. He struggled to find the right words in English and Polish. I wanted you to choose. I did not want you to feel forced. You came here because you had no choice, no other option. I thought maybe if I gave you time, you could choose for yourself. Choose if you wanted to stay, wanted to be." He gestured helplessly. "Wanted to be my wife in truth." Alina stared at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the room to stand in front of him. She was so small, he thought, the top of her head barely reaching his chin. She reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "Catherine," she said softly, I choose you, I choose stay, I choose be wife." His heart hammered in his chest. "You are sure, very sure?" She smiled up at him. "You good man, you kind. You teach me, you patient. You make me laugh even when words hard. Every day I think I lucky to find him, lucky he choose me." "I am the lucky one," Catherine said roughly. He covered her hand with his own. "Alina, He switched to Polish, hoping he was saying it right. "Kocham sai. I love you." Her eyes widened and filled with tears. "You learned this. For me, I have been practicing for weeks," he admitted. "I wanted to say it right. I wanted you to hear it in your own language first so you would know I meant it." "Oh, Catherine." She stood on her toes and kissed him, and it was the sweetest thing he had ever felt. When she pulled back, she said, "I love you too," in Polish, in English, in any words. "I love you." That night, Catherine gave her the bedroom again, but this time she took his hand and pulled him in with her, closing the door behind them. For the first time since she had arrived, she did not barricade the door. For the first time, they were truly husband and wife. Winter settled over the ranch in December, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Catherine had never been happier. Alina fit into his life so perfectly it was as if she had always been there. She sang while she worked, Polish songs that he did not understand but loved to hear. She had a beautiful voice, clear and sweet. In the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk, their conversations growing easier as her English improved and his Polish did too. They started mixing their traditions. For Christmas, Alina made Polish dishes, including a 12-dish meal on Christmas Eve that she explained was traditional. Catherine contributed a small tree that they decorated with paper chains and strings of berries. On Christmas morning, he gave her a gift, a warm wool cloak he had ordered from the catalog, dark blue to match her eyes. She cried when she opened it and gave him a gift in return, a shirt she had sewn herself with careful, intricate embroidery on the collar. As winter turned to spring of 1883, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was doing well. Catherine had been able to buy more cattle with his profits from the previous year, and Alina suggested they add some chickens so they could have fresh eggs. She proved to have a talent with the chickens, and soon they had a whole flock and more eggs than they could eat themselves. In April, Margaret Werner came to visit, bringing her daughter Clara, and Alina made tea and served cake, and the three women sat on the porch talking. When they left, Alina was glowing. "It's good to have friends," she told Katherine. "I miss having women to talk with." "I am glad," Katherine said. "You should ride over to visit them whenever you want." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you. You always think of what make me happy." In May, Alina started feeling ill in the mornings. At first, Katherine worried she had caught some sickness, but Margaret came over and talked with Alina privately for a while, and then both women came out to the porch where Katherine was nervously waiting. "Katherine," Margaret said with a broad smile, "you are going to be a father." His brain seemed to stop working. "A father, Alina is." "Pregnant," Alina said, beaming at him. "We have baby in winter, I think." Katherine let out a whoop and swept Alina up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. A baby. They were going to have a baby. He set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Should you be resting? Do you need anything?" "I am fine," Alina assured him, laughing at his concern. "Women have babies all the time. I am strong." Over the following months, Katherine fussed over Alina constantly, much to her amusement. He insisted she not work too hard, tried to take over all the heavy chores, and worried constantly. Alina tolerated his hovering with good grace, knowing it came from love. She began to show in July, her belly rounding gently. Katherine would sometimes place his hand on her stomach and marvel at the life growing inside her. "Boy or girl, do you think?" he would ask. "I do not know," she would say, "but healthy, I hope." They spent the warm summer evenings planning for the baby. Katherine built a cradle out of smooth pine wood, sanding it carefully so there would be no splinters. Alina sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches as perfect as ever. They argued, laughing, about names. Alina wanted traditional Polish names if it was a boy. Katherine lobbied for American names, and they finally agreed they would decide when they met the baby. As fall arrived and Alina grew larger, Katherine became increasingly nervous. He had helped with animal births countless times, but the thought of Alina going through that terrified him. Margaret assured him that Alina was healthy and strong, and that she would come to help when the time came. The baby arrived on a cold night in early December, coming faster than expected. Katherine had ridden out in the dark to fetch Margaret, and by the time they returned, Alina was already well into labor. Margaret took over with calm competence, shooing Katherine out of the room despite his protests. He paced the main room for what felt like hours, his heart in his throat every time he heard Alina cry out. Finally, after an eternity, he heard a different cry, high and angry, and then Margaret was opening the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is asking for you." Katherine rushed into the room. Alina was propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. He approached slowly, almost afraid, and she smiled up at him. "Look," she whispered, "our son." Katherine looked down at the baby's tiny red face, the little fists waving, the eyes squinted shut, and felt his entire world shift. "He is perfect," he breathed. "He has your nose," Alina said, laughing softly. "Poor boy." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. Alina looked down at their son, then back at Katherine. "I was thinking, maybe name that is good in both languages. What you think about Conrad? Is Polish name but sound like English too, and his middle name can be Joseph for your father." "Conrad Joseph Vaughn," Katherine said, testing it out. "I like it. Conrad." The baby made a small sound and both of them laughed, delighted. Over the next months, life revolved around Conrad. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Katherine was amazed by how natural Alina was as a mother, patient and loving even when Conrad cried through the night. As Conrad grew, Alina sang to him in Polish and Katherine talked to him in English, and the baby seemed to listen to both languages equally. By the time he was 6 months old and starting to babble, Katherine and Alina joked that he would be bilingual before he could even walk. The years passed peacefully. The ranch continued to prosper. Katherine expanded the herd and built a bigger barn. Alina's chickens multiplied until they had to build a second coop. They hired a hand to help with the heaviest work, a young man named Samuel, who was grateful for the steady employment. Conrad grew into a bright, energetic little boy who loved following his father around the ranch and helping his mother in the garden she had planted. When he was 3, Alina became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1887, they welcomed a daughter they named Anna Marie. She was tiny and delicate, with blonde hair like her mother. 2 children kept them busy, but Katherine and Alina worked together smoothly, partners in every sense of the word. Their love had deepened over the years, growing from those first tentative feelings into something solid and unshakable. They rarely fought, and when they did, they always made up quickly, neither able to stay angry at the other for long. Conrad started learning his letters when he was 4, studying from the same primer Katherine had used to teach Alina English years before. Alina taught him Polish at the same time, determined that her children would know their heritage. Katherine supported this wholeheartedly, proud of his bilingual family. In 1889, when Conrad was 5 and Anna was 2, Alina announced she was pregnant again. This baby arrived in the early spring of 1890. Another boy they named Martin Thomas, after no one in particular, but because they both liked the name. 3 children made the house feel full and alive in a way Katherine had never imagined during those lonely years before Alina arrived. There was always noise, always laughter, always something happening. The older children helped with the younger ones, and Alina managed them all with the same calm competence she brought to everything. By the time Arizona became a territory in 1891, the Vaughn family was well established in the community. Katherine served on the town council for a time. Alina was known for her excellent cooking and her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need. Their children were healthy and happy, running wild across the ranch land, learning to ride and rope and tend animals alongside their father. One evening in the late summer of 1892, after the children were finally asleep, Katherine and Alina sat on the porch together watching the stars come out. It had been 10 years since Alina had arrived on that stagecoach, frightened and alone and unable to speak a word of English. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked her. "Coming here, marrying me, all of it?" Alina looked at him in surprise. "Regret? Katherine, no, never." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "This is best thing I ever do. You, children, this life, is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I was so scared when you arrived," Katherine admitted. "Scared I would not be able to make you happy, that you would hate this life, that you would leave." "I was scared too," Alina said. "Everything so strange, so different, but you were kind, patient. You learned my language to say you love me. How could I not love you back?" Katherine pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I remember the first time I told you I loved you, stumbling through the Polish words, terrified I was saying it wrong." "You did say it wrong," Alina said, laughing. "But I understand what you mean, and it was beautiful." "I love you," Katherine said in Polish, his accent much better now after years of practice. "I love you," Alina replied in English, her accent still there but faint. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Katherine thought about that lonely man he had been 10 years ago, desperate enough to place an advertisement for a mail-order bride. That man could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this profound sense of belonging. "Tell me again," Alina said softly. "Story of when I first arrive." Katherine smiled. It was a story they had told many times over the years, especially to the children, who loved to hear about how their parents met. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified," he began, "clutching your bag like it was a shield. I tried to smile at you, but I think I just looked scary. And then you spoke in Polish and I realized we had a problem." "You looked at me like I was a problem to solve," Alina interjected, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "You were a problem to solve," Katherine teased. "The most wonderful problem I ever had. I took you home and tried to teach you English with that old primer, pointing at pictures like a fool." "You were sweet," Alina said. "So patient, even when I not understand anything. And then I show you my dictionary and you say you want to learn Polish." I could not believe it. This big, tough cowboy want to learn my language. "I wanted to talk to you," Katherine said simply. "Really talk. I wanted to know you. And I figured if you were learning English, the least I could do was meet you halfway." "Best decision you ever make," Alina said firmly. "Show me you respect me, respect where I come from. Make me feel like I not have to leave all of myself behind to be American wife." "You brought so much to my life," Katherine said. "Language, food, traditions, love, everything. This ranch was a house before you came. You made it a home." Alina lifted her head to look at him. "You made me believe I deserve good things. In Poland, after family die, I think maybe I cursed. Maybe God forget about me. But then I come here and you so kind and I think maybe not cursed, maybe blessed instead." "Definitely blessed," Katherine agreed. He cupped her face in his hand. "I am blessed every single day to have you." She kissed him softly. After 10 years and 3 children, her kiss still made his heart race. A sound from inside made them both turn. Little Martin was crying. Alina started to get up, but Katherine stopped her. "I will get him. You rest." He went inside and picked up his youngest son, rocking him gently until he settled back to sleep. Looking down at the small, peaceful face, Katherine felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. This life, this family, this love, all of it had started with a desperate advertisement and a frightened young woman stepping off a stagecoach unable to speak his language. And he had learned her language to say, "I love you," and she had learned his, and they had built something beautiful together. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Conrad grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build and temperament. He was serious and hardworking, but he had inherited his mother's gentle kindness. By the time he was 12, he was doing a full share of the ranch work, riding out with Katherine to check on the cattle and mend fences. Anna was different, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's determination, and she wanted to know how everything worked. She pestered Katherine with questions constantly and followed Alina around learning to cook and sew, but she also insisted on learning to rope and ride as well as her brothers. Alina encouraged her independence, remembering what it was like to feel powerless and wanting better for her daughter. Martin was the baby, even as he grew older, sweet-natured and affectionate. He loved animals and spent hours with the horses and cattle, talking to them like they understood every word. He had a gift with them, too. Even the most nervous animals would calm under his small hands. In 1895, when Conrad was 12, Anna was 8, and Martin was 5, Kingman got its first real schoolhouse, and Alina insisted all 3 children attend regularly. Katherine agreed, wanting his children to have the education he had mostly missed. The teacher, A young woman from back east named Miss Sarah Brennan was impressed by the Vaughn children, especially their ability to speak two languages fluently. That same year, Katherine decided to expand the ranch operations, adding sheep to their cattle. It was a controversial decision. Many cattle ranchers looked down on sheep farming, but Katherine had always been practical rather than prideful. The wool market was strong, and Alina was thrilled to have sheep to shear and wool to work with. She taught Anna how to spin, and even got Katherine to build her a loom so she could weave cloth. The ranch continued to grow. By 1896, they had over 500 head of cattle and a substantial flock of sheep. They hired 2 more hands to help with the work, and Katherine built a small bunkhouse for them to live in. Samuel, their first hired hand, was still with them, now married himself to a girl from town, and they lived in a cottage Katherine built on the edge of the ranch property. Life was good. The children were healthy and thriving. The ranch was prosperous. Katherine and Alina's love had only grown stronger over the years, weathering the inevitable storms that came with any life together, the worries about sick children and bad weather and low cattle prices, but always coming through together. In the spring of 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out. It was far away and did not touch their daily lives much, but Katherine saw young men from town signing up to go fight and felt grateful his son was still too young. Conrad was 15 and tall enough to pass for older, but Katherine made it clear he was needed on the ranch. That summer, Alina's cousin from Warsaw, the one who had helped her get away after her family died, wrote to her for the first time in years. The letter had taken months to arrive, forwarded through several addresses. Her cousin, whose name was Peter, had immigrated to New York and was working in a factory there. He had finally tracked down Alina's address through the agency that had arranged her mail-order marriage. Alina cried when she read the letter, and Katherine held her while she explained that Peter was the only family she had left from Poland, and she had thought she would never hear from him again. She wrote back immediately, telling him about her life in Arizona, about Katherine and the children, about the ranch. She invited him to visit if he ever wanted to see the West. To their surprise, Peter wrote back saying he had been dreaming of getting out of the crowded city and would love to come for a visit. He arrived in October, a thin man in his 40s who looked exhausted from the long journey. Alina cried again when she saw him, hugging him tightly and speaking rapid Polish. Peter stayed for 3 weeks, and Katherine saw how happy it made Alina to have someone from her old life there, someone who remembered the same places she did, who spoke Polish the way she had grown up speaking it. Peter was amazed by the ranch, by the wide open spaces, by the life Alina had built for herself. "You did well, cousin," he told her in Polish one evening, Katherine understanding most of it now. "Better than I ever imagined. You found a good man and made a good life." When Peter left, he promised to write regularly, and he did. The connection to her past, however thin, seemed to settle something in Alina that Katherine had not even realized was unsettled. As the new century approached, there was a sense of change in the air. The Wild West was becoming less wild. Kingman had grown from a small frontier town to a real community with proper buildings and multiple businesses. The railroad had come through, making it easier to ship cattle and goods. Some of the old-timers grumbled that the frontier spirit was dying, but Katherine thought progress was good. It made life easier for his family. On New Year's Eve of 1899, they went into town for the celebration marking the turn of the century. The whole family dressed in their best clothes. Alina wore a dress she had made herself, deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She still looked beautiful to Katherine. just as beautiful as the day she had stepped off that stagecoach 17 years before, maybe more so because now when he looked at her, he saw not just her beauty but all the years of love and partnership, all the ways she had made his life better. The children ran around with their friends while Katherine and Alina stood with the other adults, watching fireworks that Thomas Werner had imported from San Francisco. When midnight struck and the new century began, Katherine pulled Alina close and kissed her while people cheered around them. "To the next century," he said. "To us," Alina replied, smiling up at him. "To family. To love." The early years of the new century brought more changes. Conrad turned 18 in 1900 and began talking about starting his own ranch someday. Katherine gave him a section of land on the far side of their property and helped him build a small house. Conrad worked it while still helping on the main ranch, building up his own small herd with cattle Katherine gave him as a gift. Anna, at 13, was becoming a young woman, tall and confident and sure of herself in a way that made Alina proud. She had decided she wanted to be a teacher and was studying extra hard at school, planning to attend the new normal school that had opened in Flagstaff. Martin was 10 and still obsessed with animals. He had a knack for healing them too, setting a broken leg on a dog that wandered onto the ranch and nursing it back to health, helping a cow through a difficult birth when the older men would have given up. Katherine began to think his youngest son might become a veterinarian someday if they could find a way to pay for the schooling. In the spring of 1902, Alina surprised Katherine by announcing she was pregnant again. They were both in their 40s now, and it had been 12 years since Martin was born. Katherine was worried about her health, but Alina laughed off his concerns. "I am strong," she reminded him. "I survived cholera, leaving Poland, learning new language, building ranch. I can have baby." The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, though. Alina tired more easily, and Katherine insisted she rest more and let the older children take over her usual chores. Margaret Werner, now a grandmother herself, came over frequently to check on her friend. The baby, another boy they named Peter Andrew, arrived in January of 1903. The birth was long and difficult, and there were some scary moments when Katherine thought he might lose both of them, but in the end, both mother and baby came through healthy. Peter was a small baby but strong, and he grew quickly. Having a baby in the house again when the other children were nearly grown was an adjustment, but everyone doted on the little one. Conrad, now 20 and about to get married himself to a girl from town named Ruth, joked that he would have a child at the same time as his mother. Anna loved having a baby brother to help care for. Martin, at 12, was old enough to actually be helpful rather than just another child to watch. Conrad's wedding in the summer of 1903 was a big event. Half the county came, filling the new church in town. Alina cried happy tears watching her eldest son get married, remembering when he had been a tiny baby in her arms. Katherine felt old watching his son become a man, but proud too. By 1905, Katherine was 50 and Alina was 43. Their hair was graying and their bodies ached in the mornings in ways they never had when they were young, but they were happy. The ranch was more successful than ever. Conrad and Ruth had given them their first grandchild, a little girl named Emma. Anna had finished school and was teaching at the schoolhouse in town. Martin, at 15, had convinced Katherine to let him apprentice with the veterinarian who had opened a practice in Kingman. Peter, at 2, was walking and talking and getting into everything. One evening in late summer, Katherine and Alina sat on their porch like they had so many times over the years. Peter was asleep inside. The older children were at their own pursuits. It was just the two of them and the quiet sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. 23 years, Alina said softly, since I come here. 23 years, Katherine echoed, best years of my life. You know what I remember most? Alina asked. From the beginning. What? How hard you tried. You so awkward, so nervous. But you tried so hard to make me comfortable, to talk to me, to understand. And then when you say you want to learn Polish, when you spend months learning just so you can tell me you love me in my own language. That when I know. When I know you were different, you were special. Katherine took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. You were worth every moment of effort. You are worth everything. We built good life, Alina said, looking out over the ranch, the land they had worked together to build into something substantial. Better than I ever imagined when I was alone in Poland thinking I would die with nothing. We built it together, Katherine corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder in the way that had become natural to both of them. I love you, Katherine Vaughn, in Polish, in English, in any language that ever was or will be. I love you. I love you too, Alina Vaughn. More than words in any language can say. They sat together as the stars came out, two people from completely different worlds who had found each other through chance and desperation and had built something beautiful from it. A family, a home, a love that had lasted through hard times and good, through struggle and triumph, through all the small moments that made up a life. The ranch would continue after them, passed down to their children and grandchildren. Their story would be told and retold at family gatherings. The tale of the mail-order bride who spoke no English and the cowboy who learned her language to say, I love you. It would become family legend, embellished perhaps, but the core truth always remaining the same. They had found each other. They had chosen each other. And they had built a life together that was worth every moment of difficulty, every struggle, every challenge. They had built love. As they sat there in the gathering darkness, Katherine thought about that day in 1882 when he had placed that advertisement. And then the day Alina had stepped off the stagecoach, so frightened and alone. He thought about all the moments since then, the big ones and the small ones, the times of joy and the times of sorrow, all of it woven together into the tapestry of their life. He would not change a single moment of it. The years continued their steady march. Peter grew from a toddler to a boy, bright and curious like his sister Anna had been. Conrad and Ruth had 2 more children, giving Katherine and Alina 3 grandchildren to dote on. Martin finished his apprenticeship and became a full veterinarian, one of the few in the territory, traveling around to ranches to treat animals. Anna married in 1908 to a fellow teacher, a kind man named David who appreciated her intelligence and independence. Katherine began to slow down in his 50s, his body finally showing the years of hard work. He started relying more on hired hands and on Conrad to manage the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Alina developed arthritis in her hands that made sewing difficult, which frustrated her to no end, but she adapted, finding other ways to keep busy. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, becoming the 48th state in the Union. There was a big celebration in Kingman, and the Vaughn family attended, 3 generations of them now. Katherine looked around at his children and grandchildren, at his wife beside him with her hair now more gray than blonde, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was his legacy. Not just the ranch, but the family, the love, the life they had built. The world kept changing. Automobiles started appearing on the streets of Kingman, loud and smoking and terrifying the horses. The talk was all about progress, about the modern age, about how different things were from the old frontier days. Katherine, now in his 60s, sometimes felt like a relic from another time. But when he sat on his porch with Alina in the evenings, watching the sunset over land they had worked for over 30 years, with the sounds of their grandchildren playing nearby, he felt nothing but gratitude. He had been given more than he ever deserved, more than he had ever dreamed of during those lonely years before Alina arrived. As they grew older, their children worried about them, suggesting they should move into town, maybe live with one of them, but Katherine and Alina refused. The ranch was their home. They had built it together and they would stay there together. In the spring of 1920, Katherine was 70 and Alina was 58. Peter was 17, the last of their children still at home, preparing to head off to college in Tucson. The other children came to visit often, bringing the grandchildren, and there was always noise and laughter when they did. One warm evening in May, Katherine and Alina sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Katherine's hair was white now, his face deeply lined from years in the sun. Alina's blonde hair had turned silver, and her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but to Katherine, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. 38 years, Katherine said, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the years. Since you stepped off that stagecoach. 38 years, Alina agreed. Long time, not long enough, Katherine said. I want 38 more. Alina laughed, the sound still as bright as it had been when she was young. We'd be very old if we lived that long, but I want it too. I want every moment I can have with you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the colors change in the sky as the sun set. The ranch spread out before them, not as large as some operations but successful, well-run, a good legacy for their children. You remember, Katherine asked, when I first told you I loved you? In Polish. Of course I remember, Alina said. You so nervous. You practice for weeks, you tell me later. And then you say it, and you say it little bit wrong, but I understand. And I think this man, he learned whole new language just to tell me he loved me. How can I not love him back? It was the least I could do, Katherine said. You came so far, left everything behind. Learning Polish was nothing compared to that. It was everything, Alina corrected gently. It showed me you see me. Not just mail order bride, not just wife to cook and clean, but me. Alina. Person with language and culture and past. You see me and you respect me. That was everything. Katherine raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You made my life worth living. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made everything mean something. You did same for me, Alina said. I was dying inside in Poland, dying slowly with nothing and no one. You gave me life again. You gave me love and family and home. You gave me everything. They sat together as the stars came out, two old people who had loved each other for nearly 4 decades, who had built a life together from nothing but determination and love. Around them, the ranch was quiet. The animals settled for the night, the land at peace. Inside the house, Peter was reading by lamplight, their youngest child on the verge of leaving for his own life. In houses nearby and in town, their other children were putting their own children to bed, the grandchildren who would carry on the Vaughn name and the Vaughn legacy. It had all started with a frightened young woman who spoke no English and a lonely cowboy who learned her language to say I love you. And from that beginning, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. As the years went by, Katherine and Alina grew older but not apart. If anything, they grew closer, more attuned to each other. They could communicate with a look, a gesture, barely needing words anymore after so many years together. Katherine's health began to fail in his early 70s. His heart was not as strong as it used to be, the doctor said, and he needed to take it easy. Alina fussed over him constantly, making sure he rested, making sure he took the medicine the doctor prescribed, worrying about him the way he had once worried about her. "I am fine," he would tell her, but they both knew it was not entirely true. In the winter of 1925, Katherine had a heart attack. It was mild, the doctor said, but a warning. He needed to slow down even more, rest more, avoid stress. Alina was terrified, the fear of losing him making her hover even more. "I am not ready," she told him one night as they lay in bed. "I am not ready to lose you." "You are not going to lose me," Katherine assured her, though he was not certain he believed it himself. "I am too stubborn to go anywhere." But they both knew the truth. They were old. They had been blessed with many years together, more than many people got, but time was running out. Katherine recovered from the heart attack, but he was never quite the same. He tired easily and could no longer do the physical work he once had. It frustrated him, but Alina was just grateful he was still there. They spent most of their time together on the porch or in the rocking chairs by the fireplace, talking about the past, about their children and grandchildren, about the life they had built. Sometimes they would sit in silence, comfortable with each other in a way that only came from decades together. In the spring of 1927, on a warm April afternoon, Katherine was sitting on the porch with Alina when he suddenly clutched at his chest. Alina called for help, but by the time Peter, who was visiting, could get the doctor, Katherine was gone. He died in Alina's arms, looking up at her face, the last thing he saw being the woman he had loved for 45 years. Alina was devastated. After a lifetime together, being without Katherine was like missing a part of herself. The children tried to convince her to move in with one of them, but she refused. She would stay on the ranch, in the house they had built together, for as long as she was able. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, but always missing Katherine. She would sit on the porch alone in the evenings, looking out over the ranch, talking to him as if he were still there beside her. "I miss you," she would say in Polish, the language of her childhood, the language he had learned to tell her he loved her. "Every day I miss you." Alina passed away peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1935 at the age of 73. Her children found her in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Katherine for so many years, a small smile on her face. They liked to think she had gone to be with him. They buried her next to Katherine in the small cemetery outside Kingman, under a large cottonwood tree. The headstone was simple, listing their names and dates, and underneath, an inscription their children chose. 2 languages, 1 love. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. The story of Katherine and Alina became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The story of the mail-order bride who spoke no English and the cowboy who learned her language to say "I love you." It was a story about taking chances, about overcoming barriers, about building something beautiful from difficult beginnings. It was a story about respect and patience and choosing to love even when it would have been easier not to. But most of all, it was a love story. A simple, profound love story about 2 people who found each other against all odds and built a life together that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, over a century after Katherine first claimed the land. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original section, the 3 rooms Katherine built before Alina arrived, is still there, preserved carefully. Family gatherings are held there, and the story is always told. The dictionary Alina brought with her, worn and fragile now, is kept in a display case, along with the primer Katherine used to teach her English, and a small notebook filled with Katherine's attempts to learn Polish, his handwriting getting steadily better over the pages. These items are treasured family heirlooms, physical evidence of the love story that started the Vaughn family legacy. They remind each generation that love is not always easy, that it sometimes requires effort and patience and learning entire new languages, but that it is always, always worth it. The ranch itself stands as a testament to what two people can build when they choose love, when they choose to see each other truly, when they choose to bridge the gaps between them rather than letting those gaps divide them. Katherine and Alina Vaughn loved each other for 45 years, and their love continued to echo through generations. A reminder that the most profound connections are built not in moments but in years, not in grand gestures but in daily choices, not in shared language but in shared determination to understand each other no matter what it takes. It was a love story for the ages, set in the harsh but beautiful landscape of the Arizona Territory, born from desperate circumstances and blossoming into something that would outlast them both. A mail-order bride who spoke no English, a cowboy who learned her language to say "I love you," and a lifetime built together, word by word, day by day, heartbeat by heartbeat, until they became one story, one family, one enduring legacy of love.